She rose up on her hind legs and looked me straight in the eyes, and in that moment, I realized she didn't want to attack. She wanted me to see something. When I saw the she-bear rise onto her hind legs, my breath caught because I understood. She was calling me. I am 62, though the locals still call me Hawk from my years as the village game warden. The badge is gone, the rifle boxed up after a cardiologist warned one hard jolt could finish me. These days I take slow walks in the boreal morning, nothing more strenuous than tapping a spruce with my stick. That dawn seemed harmless. Thin May sun slanted through snow-damp branches, and I was humming an old folk tune when the forest exhaled her. She stepped from behind a birch, cinnamon, rangy, winter fur still shedding. Any sensible man would back away, but I froze. The bear didn't charge, didn't even huff. She just stared. I remember the crunch of melting snow under my soles, the tang of sap rising in the air, the way the wind carried the distant drumming of a woodpecker like a heartbeat, all ordinary notes in the spring symphony, until they fell away into a single, echoing silence comprised of her presence. My first instinct was the old ranger drill: make myself big, speak firm, retreat slowly. But laced through the caution was a thread I couldn't name, a pull older than training, older than fear itself. Something in me recognized the gravity of her stance, the deliberate calm, the unblinking eyes that said, "Listen." As we walked, I kept cataloging exits the way I once briefed rookie wardens: climbable spruce at 2 o'clock, shallow creek to my left, bear spray back home, useless in the shed. Yet each time she glanced back, the world shrank to the quiet pact between us. She would show, I would follow, neither quite trusting, neither willing to break the spell. She dropped to all fours, walked a few yards, then looked back at me. Invitation, clear as speech. Come. My pulse hammered, yet my boots moved. Easy, girl, I muttered, not sure for whom the comfort was. She led. I followed, keeping a respectful gap, our footfalls muffled by thaw-soft moss. Every few paces she'd stop, check that I was still there, then amble on. She avoided blowdowns, skirting obstacles the way a guide would for a limping guest. The thought chilled me. She was thinking about my path. What if she had cubs ahead? A sow with young can turn savage. Instinct begged retreat. But each time her eyes met mine, they carried something softer than fear, heavier than hunger. Need. The trail funneled us into a clearing ringed with ancient pine. She stopped at the far edge. Light caught a scar on her shoulder, old bullet burn, maybe from poachers. She rose again, sniffed the air, then settled, watching me as though the next move was mine. I saw nothing special: patchy grass, last year's cones, and a silence so thick it throbbed. I should have marked her behavior, reported it to fish and game. Instead, I whispered, "What do you want me to see?" Raven wings cracked overhead. She flinched, but stayed. Seconds stretched like taffy. Under her gaze, the world felt suspended. Then she bowed her head, slow, deliberate, touched nose to earth, and flicked aside a paw full of duff. A simple gesture, careful as someone turning back a quilt. I edged closer and knelt. An earthy smell rose, rot mixed with a sudden cedar sweetness. She shuffled back 2 paces and sat, waiting. My glove scraped away needles. Beneath them the soil had been disturbed recently. Expecting nuts or a cached kill, I brushed again, and felt cloth, stiff with age, dyed a fading cherry red. Everything inside me folded. 30 years ago, that exact red lit up the knit cap my 5-year-old Greta wore the day she followed me into these woods and vanished. Air sucked out of my lungs. Trees wavered like mirages as memory crashed. Search parties, dogs, my wife's cracked prayers, the official line, presumed dead. Life staggered on around a hollow core. Now, in a bear's clearing, lay the ghost of that day. The she-bear chuffed, low and throaty, almost soothing. I looked up. Her eyes shone with a tenderness that defied every wildlife manual I ever wrote. No dominance, no threat, only a solemn ache, as though she carried grief parallel to mine. My throat closed. Knees hit dirt. Tears burned cold cheeks. I held the shred of yarn like a heartbeat. She watched without moving. For a mad second I imagined she might press her muzzle to my shoulder. Instead, she remained still, sentinel to my storm. I don't know how long that hush lasted. Man unraveling, beast serene. At last she exhaled, a sigh deep as river ice breaking, turned, and walked back the way we'd come. Halfway she paused, looking over her shoulder, amber eyes thick with unsaid things. I wanted to shout questions, chase her, anything, but language felt too small. She slipped into spruce shadow, branches swaying closed behind her. I thought I could simply leave, bury this scrap and the memory with it. I even stepped back, heart rattling, but the forest leaned in, whispering, "Not yet." Somewhere deeper among the trunks, her rumble rolled like far thunder, still calling me. I thought I'd walk away and forget that strange gaze, but now I know this was only the beginning. The morning after the redcap revelation, I woke before first light, pulse ticking like a drum. All night the forest had whispered inside my skull, the bear's amber stare refusing to fade. I told myself I only wanted fresh air, that my heart needed the walk, but truth crawled under every excuse. I hoped she would be there. Gray dawn unrolled like thin silk over the treetops. I took the same route, boots crunching frostbit needles, every sense stretched. For a while nothing stirred but chickadees. I started thinking I'd imagined her, grief conjuring a guardian out of shadows. Then, just past the beaver pond, a shape stepped from the gloom. She stood broadside between two cedars, coat dark with dew, head slightly lowered. No huff, no swat, only that unwavering gaze pinning me as surely as any whisper could. A breath left me in a cloud. I lifted my empty hand so she could see. She blinked, turned, and began to walk. "Okay, girl," I murmured, legs moving before the thought finished. I kept the gap wide, a dozen yards, maybe more, but didn't dare lose sight of her shoulders rolling beneath shaggy fur. A ranger's habits die hard. I marked wind direction, escape trees, angles of sun. Yet each practical note felt flimsy beside the raw conviction that she wanted something from me. Every few strides she glanced over her shoulder, dark eyes flicking to mine like a lighthouse beam. She was measuring me. She kept looking back, checking if I was still coming, as if she was afraid to be alone. The notion sliced deeper than claws ever could. We crossed an old skid trail where moose tracks chevroned through mud. Instead of following the easy wildlife corridor, she veered onto a faint, overgrown footpath I recognized from my warden days, a line men once hauled maple sap along. Saplings now arched over it, but fallen trunks were oddly absent. She wove around fresh blowdowns the way a person would thread furniture in a dark room. That deliberate choice prickled my scalp. She wasn't taking the bear's way, she was taking mine. 3 times she paused at forks, waiting until I closed within a few steps before pressing on. I whispered nonsense to keep my voice steady. Weather notes, scripture fragments, Greta's nursery rhymes, anything to keep from drowning in the rising tide of impossible. Half a mile in, we skirted the edge of an abandoned trapper's cabin. Roof caved, door sagging, the place smelled of mold and rusted memory. She kept the cabin on her left, arcs gentle, never forcing me into tight quarters. It hit me that she was steering clear of confined spaces, choosing openness where my frail heart could breathe. Sun climbed, frosting spiderwebs in gold, underbrush thinned, replaced by moss hummocks soft as quilts. She slowed to a saunter. I noticed her right rear leg bore a faint limp, old wound stiff in the morning chill. Instinct pushed me to pity. Training told me never show weakness. Both urges tangled until I simply followed, half man, half question mark. She stopped where a birch snag leaned against a granite outcrop and sat on her haunches, breathing steam. I held still, hands trembling more from wonder than fear. She swung her head toward a stand of younger pines ahead, then back to me, then forward again. Clear direction. There. I stepped past her, boots sinking into spongy earth. A squirrel scolded overhead. She ignored it, shoulders easing as I took point. 10 yards in, the ground dipped into a shallow bowl carpeted with last year's needles. The air was damp, tinged with something metallic, something sorrow-sweet. I crouched, brushed leaves aside. Nothing this time but dark soil. My chest tightened with embarrassed disappointment. Had I misread her completely? I turned to look back. She was still at the snag, head low, watching with an intensity that hurt. Not predator hunger, expectation. I scanned the hollow again. A thin trail of overturned moss led off to the right, so faint a tracker might miss it. She must have nudged something here earlier. I followed the sign like a blind man reading Braille. The trail ended at a clump of rotting stumps. Wedged between two roots lay a strip of fabric knotted around a small wooden spool, the kind of toy pioneer kids twirled on strings. The fabric, once blue, was now sun-bleached to gray, but the stenciled daisies screamed across decades straight into my gut. Greta's Sunday dress had matched that pattern. I knew because my wife stitched it herself, cursing dull needles and singing lullabies in the same breath. My knees buckled. Fingers shook as I freed the spool from the knot. The wood was gnawed on one edge. Tiny teeth marks. Maybe chipmunk. Maybe a child long gone. Wind sighed through the pines like voices just out of reach. Behind me, the bear made a low rumble, almost a hum. I faced her, tears hot on cold cheeks. Why me? My voice cracked like old bark. She dipped her head once, a solemn nod that felt older than any creed. A rational corner of my mind scrambled for explanation. Maybe she'd lost a cub and wanted help. Bears adopt orphaned young sometimes. Or she'd grown used to scavenging near camps, learned to read human cues. Maybe. But deep down, I felt the flimsy paper of every guess tearing against a truth too large to name. I wanted to help her, to help whatever missing thing she mourned. Yet I was the one being led, not the rescuer. I thought maybe she'd lost her cub. I wanted to help, but I had no idea she was guiding me toward the single most important moment of my life. I tucked the spool and fabric inside my coat, heart hammering like axe blows. The bear stood, muscles rippling, and with one last backward glance moved deeper into the trees. She didn't hurry, didn't threaten, only trusted I would follow. And heaven help me, I did. I pushed farther into the spruce gloom, the scrap of Greta's dress hot against my chest, the bear's lumbering shadow always just ahead. At some point the wind died, and the forest pulled a hush over itself so complete, I heard my own heart ticking like an old pocket watch. That was when it came. A thread-thin sound, half sob, half exhale, so faint I wondered if it belonged to memory, not flesh. I halted, tilting my head. It drifted again, neither bird song nor branch creak. A stifled whimper carried on no breeze at all. The she-bear stopped in the same instant, muscles stiffening beneath her coat. She pivoted, nose questing, then locked her gaze on a solitary jack pine jutting from a mossy rise. Instead of advancing, she folded onto her haunches, forepaws planted like stone pillars. Every line of her said, "Wait." I swallowed. My ranger brain spat warnings. Never corner yourself, never step toward a stationary sow. But the plea in her posture outweighed every drilled reflex. She wasn't guarding, she was guiding, and now she left the final yards to me. I edged forward, boots sinking into damp loam. The strange cry fluttered once more, fading as quickly as it formed, like someone trying not to be heard. A chill rippled my spine. Windless days can make trees groan in their own joints, but this sound wasn't wood complaining. It was wounded breath. The jack pine loomed, trunk twisted with age, its lowest boughs mantled with lichen. I expected claw marks, a den hole, some sign of a cub. Instead, my eye snagged on the base where the roots heaved up in a thick knotted hump, earth cracked and sagging around them, as though the tree had tried to swallow something too large and failed. Fresh dirt streaked the bark, dark against the pale scales. Instinct made me drop to a crouch. I traced the rise with gloved fingers. The soil was loose, recently disturbed. A sharp scent, iron and damp cedar, rose when I brushed aside needles. My pulse hammered so loud I feared the bear might hear. Behind me, she remained utterly still. She just watched me. She didn't growl. She didn't even breathe loud. It was as if she were praying. I probed deeper, unearthing a circle of woven birch bark no wider than a dinner plate. Its center bulged, stitched tight with spruce roots that had grown over whatever lay beneath. Years must have passed for wood to clutch the object so possessively. My mind reeled. Who hides something under a living tree, and why would a bear bring me here? I glanced back. Her eyes glistened, catching a shard of light like wet amber. Not a flicker of menace, only solemn urgency. The forest around us seemed to lean closer, branches holding their breath. I wedged my knife under one root, levering gently until it popped free with a damp snap. The bark disc shifted. Another muffled whimper escaped the earth, or was it only air sighing through the sudden gap? Hard to tell with blood roaring in my ears. As I peeled the lattice up, rot sweet scent poured out, mixed with something strangely floral, like dried lilac trapped in time. Beneath the bark was cloth again, but not bright this time. Faded ivory linen, folded into a small packet, edges tied with a strip of leather. The knots were clumsy, child-sized. My throat closed. Hands shook so badly I had to steady one wrist with the other. A single tug parted the ties. Inside lay a wooden whistle carved in the shape of a loon, paint long flaked away. I hadn't seen it since Greta's 6th birthday. She'd loved the hollow, mournful note it made, pretended the loon answered her across evening lakes. The hurt hit so hard my knees sank into moss. Tears blurred everything. I pressed the whistle to my lips, but no sound emerged, clogged with dirt, just a mute memory of song. The bear uttered a low moan, deep and heartbreaking, and in that vibration I felt an echo of every sleepless night, every search party lantern fading in fog. I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" My voice cracked like a frost-split branch. She lowered her head, eyes never leaving mine, as if the question itself was the answer, because someone had to. Silence folded over us again, thick and brimming. I realized I was kneeling at a grave of sorts, yet what was buried wasn't a body, but fragments of childhood, preserved by roots and watched over by a creature no textbook could explain. A rational man would flag this site for forensics, call authorities, rope it off. I could barely rise, let alone think protocol. I slipped the whistle into the pocket beside the fabric scrap, two pulsing relics against my ribs. The bear still sat, breath slow, ears relaxed. Not triumphant, not impatient, simply present, the way a chapel holds presence long after candles burn out. I felt a wordless vow pass between us. I would keep following until the forest relinquished its full truth, or swallowed us both. If I'd known what else the earth was ready to yield, I might have turned back right then, whistling my daughter's mute tune to drown the fear. But the woods were only just finding their voice, and I was only beginning to listen. I didn't leave the hollow that night. Dusk seeped through the pines, and I lit a single match to keep my courage warm. The she-bear lay a short distance off, head on paws, eyes reflecting firefly glints. Every few minutes she lifted her nose, tested the wind, then settled again. A silent promise. We were not done. At first light she rose, shook the dew from her coat, and walked to the jackpine. She waited until I stood beside her, then swung her massive head toward a neighboring spruce whose roots sprawled like knuckles across the moss. One claw scraped the ground. There, dig. The soil was looser than I expected, sifted like someone had already started the work. I set aside my gloves, sank bare fingers into the cold earth, and scooped. Each handful smelled of rot and sap and something faintly sweet. Old lilac again, the scent that haunted Greta's bedroom. 6 inches down my nail snagged fabric. I paused, heart stuttering, then pulled gently. A blanket emerged, wool once plum-colored, now a patchwork of mold and time. Mice had chewed holes the size of coins. I spread it on the ground, and the bear lowered her head as if recognizing a flag. Under the blanket lay a small wooden box, warped but intact. I traced its lid, feeling shallow knife marks, a child's attempt at carving flowers. The latch was rusted shut. One hard twist snapped it. Hinges groaned like old doors in a dream. Inside, neatly arranged despite decades underground, were 3 objects: a yellowed plastic pony, a cracked marble that still caught shards of morning sun, and a curled photograph. I lifted the photo with shaking hands, afraid it might crumble. The image was drained of color, but the shapes were unmistakable. A little girl in a knitted cap, grin wide enough to swallow the sky, one arm thrown around the neck of a stubby-legged bear cub. Both faces glowed with a trust so pure it hurt. My knees folded. I fell to the forest floor, and the she-bear watched me. She didn't move. She just let out a long sigh, like a person finally allowed to speak the truth. 30 years dissolved in an instant. I was back on the porch calling Greta for supper, back in the search party shouting her name into fog, back in the sterile office where a deputy slid a file across the desk and said, "You need to consider the likelihood." I had considered it every day since. A likelihood is not a goodbye. Now here she was, alive on paper, laughing beside a cub that could only have grown into the animal breathing 10 yards from me. The air around us warped, full of sounds no ear could catch. I pressed the photo to my chest, sobs breaking loose like thunder under ice. The she-bear took one slow step closer, then stopped, as if any further might shatter us both. Memories tumbled, Greta slipping sugar cubes to a neighbor's hound, rescuing a fledgling that fell from the eaves, promising she'd never fear the woods because, "Dad, the animals know me." I had smiled then, proud and a little amused. I wasn't smiling now. A rational voice in my skull screamed, coincidence, hoax, hallucination. I wanted to believe it. Easier to doubt my senses than admit nature had been safeguarding my daughter's relics while I cursed the dark. I told myself I must be losing my mind, or that this was some cruel trick, but what came next wouldn't fit any logic I owned. The bear pawed the earth once more, nudging the box toward me. Then she stood on hind legs, towering, chest bold, eyes locked on mine. For a heartbeat, we were the only creatures in the turning world, old ranger, older forest, and a messenger in fur. She dropped back down, huffed softly, and nudged the blanket forward too, as if insisting I claim it. My fingers closed around the toys, the cloth, the faded smile. Heat flooded my ribs, painful as frostbite thawing. I understood then that she hadn't just found these things. She had kept them, moved them, saved them, until I was brave, or broken, enough to follow. "Thank you," I whispered, the words small, insufficient. She blinked once, solemn, as if acknowledging a debt paid on both sides. The sky had shifted from rose to pale gold. Somewhere a thrush began its morning scale. I packed the box, wrapped it in the blanket, and cradled it like a newborn. The bear turned, nose pointing deeper into the trees. Another path waited, roots knotted with secrets. I rose on unsteady legs, photo clenched tight. The forest opened ahead, shadowed and luminous all at once. My grief, once a cavern, was now a corridor, leading somewhere I could not yet name, and the she-bear walked on, sure-footed, never glancing back to see if I would follow. She knew I would. The path the bear chose tunneled through young firs, and as I followed I felt the need to speak, if only to keep from splintering. My words spilled into the hush, meant for her, for the trees, maybe for myself. 30 years, I began, voice snagging on pine-scented air. Greta was 5, small enough that her rubber boots slapped together when she ran. That morning we'd had late spring sun and puddles the size of silver dollars. I told her I was checking sap lines before supper. She begged to tag along. I told her next time. She stood at the gate pouting, red cap slipping over her ears. I waved and promised stories when I got back, then strode into the woods, whistling the same tune my father taught me. I never noticed the soft patter behind me, the shadow half my height darting from trunk to trunk. Halfway up the ridge I shot a glance back, for no reason except habit, and saw nothing but trees. By then she was off the trail, tracking me by sound, certain Dad knew exactly where she was. When the sun touched the ridgeline, I returned to an empty yard. My wife thought Greta was with me. I thought she was inside coloring frogs in her scrapbook. Panic came like lightning, no warning, just white fire. We called neighbors, then the sheriff. The search lasted a week. Dogs combed ravines, volunteers beat brush with sticks, helicopters churned the sky. On day 3, they found her red cap snagged on blackberry thorns near the beaver pond, the same pond I just circled with the bear yesterday. No footprints, no blood, only that bright splash of wool. Tracks were scarce, spring thaw turned soil to soup, but one deputy found claw marks on an alder and decided a predator had taken her. Bears had been seen scavenging trash that summer. A theory formed. Cub-hungry sow, quick kill, body dragged off before we ever reached her. My wife clung to hope longer than anyone. She'd sit on the porch at night humming lullabies, saying Greta would hear them. Grief ate our marriage the way fungus eats heartwood, slow, hidden, inevitable. She moved south 2 years later, chasing heat and silence. I stayed, because one of us had to listen if the forest ever spoke her name again. The state filed a death certificate, presumed accidental mauling. I quit the warden's job not long after. Every bear track felt like an accusation. The badge lost its shine once it failed the only person who mattered. Now I was trudging behind a living relic, clutching a blanket that still held the ghost of my daughter's scent. The plastic pony, the marble, they were hers. I had etched their shapes into my skull from countless bedtime cleanups, but the photograph, that was new. In the picture she knelt in the grass, one arm hooked around a bear cub's neck, both of them beaming as if the world were simple and safe. I remembered no cub. The girl, though, she was undeniably my Greta, the dimple on her left cheek clear despite the fading ink. Questions rattled inside me. Who snapped that photo? Where was it taken? How had it ended under tree roots miles from our old cabin? More than anything, how had a wild bear come to guard it like a reliquary? The she-bear quickened her pace, and I stumbled to keep up. Branches slapped my shoulders, but memory stung worse. The night the search was called off, the way neighbors couldn't meet my eyes, the hush at her memorial service when no coffin was present, only a stack of watercolor drawings she'd left on the fridge. I kept talking, filling the woods with the story she already seemed to know. We traced rivers, drained ponds, set bait cams. I climbed this very hill 3 times over, screaming till my throat bled. If you were here then, girl, did you see us? Did you watch us blundering, not understanding your language? She flicked an ear, neither speeding up nor slowing down, but I sensed her listening, some mammalian empathy vibrating in the space between us. The sun climbed higher, sweat mixed with tears on my face, salty proof of a heart that hadn't stopped hurting even after decades of pretending. I looked again at the photo, at the way Greta's fingers curled in the cub's fur. trustful, certain. Who taught her that certainty? Not me. I'd taught her caution, rules, the safe distance between child and wild. And yet there she was, fearless, belonging. A root caught my toe. I pitched forward and would have hit the ground if the bear hadn't paused, blocking the fall with her flank. Unintentional maybe, but it felt like catching. When I steadied, she looked back, eyes soft as upturned soil. Why her? My whisper cracked. Why my child, your cub? The forest answered with the far cry of a loon, the same note her toy whistle once carried across twilight lakes. Something shifted then. Understanding or surrender, I can't say. The question no longer begged for an autopsy of facts. The forest had chosen its own way of keeping her alive, and now it was choosing me to learn the rest. We pushed on, the bear leading, my past trailing like smoke through cedars. Whatever waited ahead would change every page of the story I'd told myself for 30 years. And for the first time since the cap was found, I felt the faintest glimmer that the ending might not be carved in stone after all. Sleep clung to me like wet wool, but first light found my boots already crunching frost, carrying me back to the hollow. I half expected the bear to be waiting, yet the clearing stood empty, only the jack pine and yesterday's scar on the earth. For several aching minutes I paced the perimeter, heartbeat loud against the hush, telling myself the whole thing could have been grief, dressed up as miracle. Then a branch popped on the far side of the ridge. She emerged, coat steaming in the pale sun, and for one raw heartbeat, I felt the world turn right side up again. She chuffed, low, throaty, then swung her head down the slope. The invitation was unmistakable. I followed, no longer counting yards or planning escapes, just keeping her shape in view the way a child keeps an adult's hand. She moved slower than yesterday, pausing often, glancing back after each pause. She kept looking at me as if asking, "Are you still coming? Are you ready to see what we keep?" The path curled past the beaver pond, past the ragged cabin, back to the jack pine where the blanket grave had opened. I wondered why return here. Hadn't we bled this place of secrets? But she veered slightly east, to a thicket of young balsam that I would have bypassed without thought. She nosed aside a curtain of branches and waited until I stepped through. There, beneath a shallow overhang of roots, lay another cache, a bright splash of color against the dark soil, a child's gauzy scarf, faded sky blue, still knotted like a bandana. Beside it, a flat river stone the size of my palm, its pale face smeared with charcoal lines that once framed a sun and crooked trees, Greta's forest family, a picture she loved to redraw on anything that would hold pigment. The charcoal had blurred in moisture, yet the clumsy sunbeams were hers, unmistakable. My breath hitched. Nestled between scarf and stone was a folded square of birch bark, edges curled but intact. Hands trembling, I opened it and found a single word scrawled in childish block letters. Papa. The charcoal line pressed so hard it gouged the bark. She'd tried so fiercely to make the letters stay. I sank to one knee, throat scorched. Memories slammed back. Greta perched on the porch rail, tongue between her teeth, sketching suns on pebbles while I sharpened her pencils. Greta twirling that same scarf into a makeshift flag the day she first tried skipping stones. All the years I'd believed those mementos lost to mud and coyotes, and here they were, preserved in a vault of roots. Behind me, the bear sat, not threatening, not retreating, simply present, a sentinel of bone and fur. Her eyes held no triumph, only patient questioning, as though she were a teacher waiting for the slowest pupil to grasp the lesson. She gazed at me as if asking, "Do you understand now? Do you see how we remember?" Tears blurred bark into watercolor. "Yes," I whispered, voice ragged. "I see." The forest around us seemed to release a collective breath. needles shivering in a breeze I hadn't felt a moment before. I tucked the scarf and note into my coat, then pressed the drawing stone to my lips. The charcoal left a ghostly smudge that tasted of ash and warm summers. I wondered how many winters the bear had guarded these fragments, moving them when floods threatened or snow packed too deep, waiting for the human they belonged to. A thrush fluted high overhead. The bear's ears twitched, but her gaze never left me. Shame pooled in my chest, shame for every bear I'd once treated as a target instead of a story, for every night I'd cursed the dark instead of listening to it. She had done more for Greta's memory than I had managed in 30 years of mourning. I reached out, a reckless thing, and touched the back of her paw. The fur was coarse, warm with life. She didn't flinch, only exhaled, a rumble like distant thunder rolling off a mountain. That single breath carried absolution deeper than words. For a moment, I thought this might be the end of the trail. I had received my daughter's relics. Surely the forest had offered all it had. Relief mingled with a sudden hollow dread. What if the bear left now? What if silence fell again? This time forever. But she rose, shook the needles from her coat, and turned her head toward a stand of older spruce farther upslope, a place I'd never walked. My pulse quickened. The lesson wasn't finished. The map curled farther than grief, deeper than memory. I thought yesterday's discoveries had closed the wound, but nature was still threading a needle through torn edges. Somewhere ahead waited the stitch that could bind past and present into something whole. I stood, pocket heavy with scarf and stone, and met the bear's eyes. "Lead on," I said. She blinked once, as if satisfied, then padded into the shadowed corridor between spruces, leaving me no choice but to follow, heart stripped bare and ready for whatever impossible truth she would reveal next. The bear guided me higher into the spruce stand, where light thinned to green dusk, and the ground breathed peat and mushroom. We slipped between towering trunks until she stopped before a wind-thrown cedar, its roots ripped skyward like a frozen explosion. In the shallow cave beneath the stump lay a scatter of bones, long cleaned by beetles, and a litter of chewed pine cones. But what froze my breath were the black strokes on the cedar's splintered heartwood, crude charcoal drawings, stick figures, bright suns, clumsy bears, layered like the pages of a child's silent diary. I brushed the wood. The lines flaked under my thumb, but I could still trace the shape of a little girl holding hands with a bear cub, their arms merged into a single, looping swirl. My chest felt too small for my lungs. Somewhere behind me, the she-bear settled onto her haunches, the forest's pulse incarnate. Memory surged. The summer Greta vanished. A local trapper had reported a wounded cub wandering the logging road, ribs showing, paw infected. We set a cage, but the cub evaded every bait, except once. We found the door sprung, fish gone, and inside, a neat pile of blueberries and wild onion shoots. "Someone's feeding him," the deputy joked, baffled. We chalked it up to campers and let the mystery fade. Now I saw that scene anew. A 5-year-old with pockets full of berries coaxing a limping cub, humming the lullaby her mother taught her. I pictured them curled together under this very cedar, her scarf around its ankle like a bandage, her whistle keeping night terrors at bay. My knees gave. The bear watched, head tilted, as if waiting for me to rearrange the past into its proper shape. "You were that cub," I whispered, voice echo small. "And she kept you alive." Wind slipped through the roots, carrying the faintest scent of lilac, Greta's favorite flower, impossible this far north. The odor dissolved as quickly as it came, like a ghost brushing past. A tide of understanding rose. If the cub survived by her hand, then the grown sow might have carried an imprint stronger than fear, an imprint that led her to me now. I crawled deeper into the cedar cave. Beneath a mat of shed fur glinted something metallic. I pulled it free. Greta's plastic barrettes, snapped in half, still faintly pink. Beside them lay the handle of my old folding knife, blade long, rusted away. She must have borrowed it the morning she followed me, a talisman of her father, lost when I was too busy to notice. Tears blurred the drawings until suns and stick limbs ran together like wet paint. Behind me, the bear emitted a low hum, a sound I'd mistaken for threat once, now clearly a murmur of reassurance. She hadn't merely called me here, she was giving me Greta's memory, everything she'd guarded for 3 decades. I turned, holding the barrettes like brittle petals. Why now? The question cracked. The bear's eyes were ocean deep, reflecting cedar shadows and my own ruin. She rose, stepped forward, and laid her muzzle against the old knife handle in my palm. The pressure was gentle, deliberate, a signature written in breath. Suddenly, I remembered another fragment from that lost summer, how patrols found tracks of a large bear pacing the perimeter each night, never breaching camp, just circling like a sentry. We assumed scavenging. Now I knew better. It was a cub grown bold, searching for the girl who once sang to it under the stars. A branch snapped overhead. Both of us flinched, instinctive mirror reactions. When silence returned, I realized how woven our stories had become. Greta must have lived for days, maybe weeks, in this pocket of wilderness, trading trust for survival, leaving crumbs of herself the forest still cradled. And when she was gone, how or why I might never learn, the bear inherited the hoard of tokens, a shrine no human eyes had seen until now. I touched the drawings again, tracing the loop that joined child and cub. My heart hammered a new rhythm, less grief, more awe. The bear huffed softly, breath warm on my wrist, as though urging me to finish the unseen sentence. I understand, I breathed. You're her witness. Sunlight speared through the canopy, igniting dust motes around us like candle sparks in a chapel. In that glow, the bear looked both ancient and newborn, keeper of a bond larger than language. I packed the barrettes and knife handle beside scarf and stone, my pockets sagging with the weight of reclaimed time. She didn't simply summon me, she bestowed her memory, every fragment of Greta left in this world. Her task was almost done. Mine had just begun. The bear stepped back, gaze drifting upslope toward a narrow ridge crowned with larches. One final destination shimmered in her posture. I drew a breath that tasted of cedar and salt and followed, carrying the mosaic of a life that love and a bear's unwavering guardianship had pieced back together against all odds. Morning filtered through the larches like liquid gold when the she-bear stepped into the meadow. No branches screened her now. She crossed open ground with the slow certainty of a priestess entering a sanctuary, sunlight rippling down her ripple-scarred coat. My breath hitched. Every gift she had laid at my feet, blanket, whistle, scarf, drawings, weighted my pockets, but nothing weighed heavier than the question of how this would end. She halted 10 paces away, closer than she had dared before. Her eyes found mine, steady, unhurried, the way time looks at a clock it no longer obeys. Wind rushed through tall grass around us, but the space between us stayed utterly still, a hush so thick it seemed to muffle the earth's turning. I wanted to speak. Thank you, forgive me, stay, but my throat locked. Tears blurred her outline, and in that watery shimmer I saw 2 bears, the great matriarch before me and the wobble-legged cub pressed laughing against my daughter in a photograph that should have never survived a single winter. She rose, front paws lifted, shoulders rolled back, chest open to the sky. Standing, she seemed to touch a height beyond rules and rifles, a living monument to everything that happens when no one is watching. Frosted breath billowed from her muzzle, a cloud that drifted toward me like incense. No growl, no roar, just one long exhale that carried weight enough to unmake language. I felt it settle over my skin, through bone, until it found the hollow place grief had carved, and filled it with something fierce and bright. For a heartbeat, the world balanced on that breath. Then her paws touched earth again, soft as snowfall. She held my gaze a final time, and in that amber stare lived a sentence I could finally read. I kept her safe as long as I could. "Now the keeping is yours." She turned. No backward glance, no hesitation. Muscles flexed, fur rippled, and she moved into shadow, each stride quieter than the last. Spruce swallowed her shape, the meadow's grass stilled, and the hush she left behind rang louder than thunder. I stood rooted, tears sliding soundless. I did not understand the full story, how a child nursed a cub, how forest and beast conspired to guard her memory, how love could outlast breath. Yet one truth blazed clear. This was no accident. The universe had woven a thread between my daughter and this bear, and that thread had been placed in my hands. A sob wrenched free. I knelt and pressed my palm to the grass she'd trod, warm still from her passing. "Thank you," I whispered, words shaking like leaves. "Thank you for every heartbeat you carried for her." Wind answered, brushing my face with the scent of pine and distant lilac. Somewhere a raven croaked, then another, their voices crossing the sky like stitches pulling two halves of a wound together. I rose, pockets heavy with relics, heart heavier with awe. The clearing looked ordinary now, sun on grass, dew flickering, nothing to mark a miracle except the trembling in my knees, yet I knew the forest would remember. So would I. She showed me what even a human mother could not preserve, only a wild heart, only the forest. If your heart is racing right now, you understand. Subscribe to the channel. We share the truths the wild keeps. I thought the chapter had closed, but seasons loop the way stories do, and one May morning, exactly 1 year after the bear vanished into spruce shadow, something inside me whispered, "Go back." So I went. I hiked the same ridge, felt the same hush slip around my shoulders like a shawl. The jack pine still guarded the clearing, bark peeling in silver curls. Grass had grown lush, wildflowers nodding where her paw prints once pressed. Nothing looked extraordinary until I saw it, a fresh little mound of brown needles right where the blanket grave used to be. My pulse lurched. No wind had piled those needles. They were arranged, tidy as a child smoothing a quilt. I knelt, fingers trembling, and brushed the layer aside. Underneath lay a single river stone, round, cool, heavy with promise. Across its face, in bold charcoal strokes, ran 3 words that stopped my lungs. "Papa, I remember." The letters were stiff, uneven, exactly the way Greta printed her name in kindergarten, tongue out, eyebrows knotted with concentration. Charcoal smudged my fingertips, fresh, as if drawn that very dawn. A loon keened in the distance, the same note her toy whistle once sang. The sky wavered. I had to grip the earth to keep from tipping into the past. A thought burst open. She's still speaking. The forest is still carrying her voice. Maybe the bear returned through winter snow to leave this. Maybe some other messenger did. All I knew was the message reached its target, straight through 31 years of silence, into the softest part of my chest. Tears came hard. I pressed the stone to my heart, felt its chill brand my skin like truth. I no longer had a shred of doubt. This was no game, no coincidence. This was farewell, through a beast, through the woods, through a love that refused to die. The wind rose then, moving the treetops in a slow wave. I listened, half expecting her heavy tread, her cedar-sweet breath. Only rustling needles replied, but the silence carried her presence anyway, the way empty rooms sometimes hold perfume. I spoke aloud, voice shaking but sure. "Thank you, Greta, and thank you, old girl, wherever you are." A raven wheeled overhead, one dark brushstroke against the glaring blue, and croaked twice as if answering. I sat beneath the jack pine for a long while, turning the stone over and over, letting its weight recalibrate the axis of my life. I pictured the bear nudging it into place, arranging needles with that careful sweep of her paw, glancing once toward the trail she knew I'd take. She had guarded my daughter's memory until I was ready to carry it myself. Now she'd sealed the story with one final gift. Eventually I rose. I placed the stone in my pack beside the blanket scrap, the whistle, the scarf, the barrettes, an heirloom set stitched together by paw and claw, an impossible grace. I looked around the clearing one last time, engraving every blade of grass into memory. Then I whispered a promise. Your story stays alive, all of it. I won't let it fade again, and I meant it. If someone else had come to me with a tale like this, I'd have smiled politely and filed it under folktales. But I saw it with my own eyes. I felt the bear's breath, heard the forest speak. And now I know, animals remember, and the woods return what a human has lost. If your heart is brimming with reverence right now, write in the comments. Nature is wiser than us.